Hello and welcome back to Labour Labs. And today we have a special edition reacting to the budget that was announced by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves yesterday. I'm here with Sarah from T, and we are going to dive into the main takeaways, particularly those that will affect young people, Gen Z, and millennials. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I write as Ms Millennial Money for T, and I'm excited to get stuck in to start talking about the budget and how this is going to affect our generation. To get started, what are your overall thoughts on the budget? What do you think will have the most impact on the people your age, your generation?
My initial reaction is that it's a tale of two tales. So there's a positive story, which is about kind of starting fresh and making sure that the country's economy is on the right footing. And part of that positive story is an increase in national minimum wage, investment in our schools, NHS and infrastructure, all positive things that kind of put us on the right foot. But actually, and where I was keen to see more about this is the appetite and the recognition that young people in this generation have changed in terms of their priorities and their ideas for the future. And so what that means actually is that young people are interested in entrepreneurship, are interested in kind of self-starting their own stuff, are interested in doing multiple things at once. And that is very common and something that I see in everyday life, and it would have been good for the budget to not only recognize that but encourage that, because that is an opportunity for growth in this country. But the other stuff on national minimum wage and investment was really good, and it was good to see us setting the slate clear and clean. And going forward, I would like to see a kind of recognizing the identity of our generation and actually encouraging the type of entrepreneurship and self-starting that we're currently seeing.
Yeah, that was definitely my feeling. I felt that it felt a little bit traditional, didn't really reflect the fact that the world of work is changing and the next generation have side hustles, they invest, they're entrepreneurial, and yeah, it would be great to see a bit more of that reflected in the future. So tax rises were expected. We always knew that they were coming down the line, including a rise on capital gains tax. And to what extent do you think this rise in capital gains tax will impact the next generation's willingness to invest? Do you think it will put them off, or do you think it's not so much of an issue?
Yeah, well, I guess again it's like a good story and a difficult one at the same time, because there are young people who are in full-time jobs working, and there are a lot of them who are doing that, and for those people they won't have an increase in income tax, there won't be an increase in national insurance tax, and so therefore on their pay slips actually there is not going to be an increase in tax, although tax rises were expected. So that's a real positive story for those young people who are in work, of which there are many. And then when we think about this kind of new type of working and this new appetite for side hustles and investing, particularly in this digital age that we live in, clearly the increases in capital gains tax don't serve as an encouragement to that, because actually this has been an increase in tax on the lowest band and on the highest capital gains tax thresholds. So it is something that perhaps will serve as a word of caution to people that are getting into this world. What I would say and what I would suggest is, as a first thing, you should open up that £20,000 tax-free ISA, because that's why it's very important, and that's why you need it, because you are exempt from these tax increases. And so if you are thinking about investing and you are an investor, first of all, make sure your first account is that tax-free ISA, but also to know, and this is where things get complicated, that there is a tax-free allowance on the first few thousand profits. I think it's around 3,000. And then if you start making significant amounts of money, that's where the taxes are. So I guess my takeaway from that is, for the people who are already in the investment world making significant amounts of profit or decent amounts of profit, it will be discouraging for them to see those tax increases. But if you're someone who is looking into this and is trying to get into this, it shouldn't discourage you, because you'll be on the kind of allowances, the tax-free allowances, and so you shouldn't be discouraged from getting into it. But certainly for the people that are in this line of work and that are already, you know, stakeholders in this field, it's not something that they will welcome.
Yeah, I felt the same. I thought that she missed a trick a little bit by not mentioning the ISA, and maybe giving like a little like kind of nugget of, you know, we'll increase the tax-free allowance by, you know, something even just quite small. I feel like that could have really changed the conversation. You know, the headlines are all going to be about, well, they are about rise in capital gains tax, and, you know, it's quite a negative sentiment being given to investors. And I think if you're not kind of as financially literate or as financially savvy as some others, then you might be quite put off by it. And yeah, it would have been great for her to mention something about ISAs, especially after the UK ISA being dropped.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I wonder who they are speaking to, and this is why it's so important that young people get involved in that conversation, because there is a strong argument that the Chancellor would have been thinking, okay, this is, relative to other taxes, is quite lenient for people who are well off, so increase this tax, but also needing to recognize that there's a lot of young people that are looking at investing, that want to come into the investment world, that are finding it very easy and simple to download an app and start thinking of their side hustle, whether that is stocks and shares, cryptos, NFTs. There's a whole host of things that young people are getting interested in, and if the Chancellor was aware of that, then actually I reckon there would be an enthusiasm to say, let's encourage that even more by increasing the tax-free allowance, by opening up more avenues to get into this, while also increasing those higher thresholds for tax. And that's why I always think it's so important that young people get involved in that conversation, because you're so right. She did miss the trick there, and it's probably because she wasn't aware of how much appetite and opportunity young people are finding in these opportunities.
The other big tax rise was on national insurance for businesses. So it went up to 15%. A lot of talk is around how this could disincentivize businesses to grow and to hire people, and it might have an impact on wage increases in the future. Do you think that this is the case? Do you think this will have an impact on especially the younger workforce?
I certainly don't think the younger workforce, because young people are already struggling to get jobs as it stands. You mentioned the world of work is changing. The world of work is changing so much that before you could just have a degree and walk into any job because having a degree was good in itself. Now, hundreds of thousands, millions of people each year graduate with a degree, and a lot of them struggle to get that first job. And the reason why is because employers are looking for experience as opposed to academic qualifications. And so people, even at the most prestigious universities that I speak to, are struggling to find that first job. And that's why there's so many graduate programs that kind of try and lock you in to keep you at a company for a significant period of time. And so for the younger generation, I would say, people like me, I would say it's not a significant hit, because actually, if you speak to young people like I do, like myself, it's hard to get a job in itself, or a job that you want, a job that you are passionate about. And so yeah, I would say actually, and that's why people are moving into side hustles and doing things that they want to do, because actually the jobs that they want aren't out there for them. They're struggling to get in them, even with the right qualifications that were traditionally useful. And so it will have an effect, and maybe it will reduce the supply of jobs, but I would argue that young people's issues are bigger than the current job market, which isn't great, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess the amount of tax that companies are paying on graduate salaries and for younger people is a bit lower. So potentially it might mean that more junior people are less at risk of, kind of being laid off due to increased costs. So yeah, I guess, yeah, you've got a good point that for young people, the struggles and the challenges are bigger than this.
Yeah, agreed.
Other hot topic was around house building and affordable homes. So it was announced that there would be a new renewed commitment to building more houses with a £500 million investment in this. And we know that for the younger generation, especially in big cities, buying a home is kind of just not even on their radar. It's so tough. Do you think, and we know that the lack of supply is a big cause for this, and a big reason for why people can't afford to buy their first houses. Do you think this will move the needle at all? Do you think this will change things, or do you think something a bit more radical is needed?
I think a lot more radical is needed in order to help people like me buy a home. It's a step in the right direction, and the government have laid out plans quite publicly that they are keen to get Britain building again. But the problems are deep and structural. Number one, and I know from first-hand experience, I'm a councillor in Southwark, so I speak to lots of developers about building and why they can't build more and trying to get them to build more affordable homes. But there's a whole range of issues. First of all, the time it takes to even start building is an issue in itself. When a development gets planning permission, it's taking about 2 years to even start building, and that's due to the fire safety legislation that's come out of Grenfell and all sorts of stuff. But actually, the process has become more dragged out and longed out, which makes it difficult to even start building. So that's already an issue. You're already waiting so long to start building with all the ambition in the world. The second thing is that lots of the homes that are being built are being sold off as second homes. So I'd like to see the government tackle that. So even when homes are being built, there's no guarantee that they're going to first-time buyers. I would like to see that become a real priority of the government, because if they're being built just to become second homes to people, then, and particularly the overseas second-hand homes, then it's not benefiting young people to be able to buy their first home. And third thing, just the building costs. You need developers to build. The building costs are so high, and so I'd like to see support for developers, not just big developers, but actually medium-sized developers, support for them to be able to build, so that we have a whole diverse array of developers coming forward to build. But until those three deep structural issues are tackled, it's going to be very hard, because just supply and demand, once the supply increases, then the price will drop, but it's not going to happen with pennies or little nuggets. It really needs radical, like you said, radical structural change. I'm hopeful for it. I'm very hopeful for it.
Yeah, well, there was an announcement about stamp duty on second homes and increasing stamp duty on second homes. So I don't know, like maybe that's kind of a step in the direction to try to discourage people from buying up these new developments as second homes. But yeah, like you said, I guess it's a kind of drop in the ocean with regards to what actually matters.
Yeah, and we're in London. When I live in London, it's very luxurious and it's an attractive place. So if you live overseas and you want a home in London, you're likely to be very, very wealthy. And so I'm not sure how much an increase in stamp duty on second homes really will deter those people who were already had enough to buy a second home in London to now
Yeah.
not do it because of an increase in stamp duty. I'm unsure, and that's why I say really radical reforms needed on this.
Yeah, I agree. Other kind of big announcements that were made, or that were made quite a big deal of during the speech, were around transport fuel, alcohol, and tobacco duty. So it was announced that duty would be introduced on vapes to try to discourage use, and that alcohol duty would be frozen on alcohol, I believe. Do you think Gen Z care about this? Does this kind of stuff impact your generation? Is it more of a kind of something that has to be thrown in there to please perhaps older generations? Yeah, be good to know what you think of that.
Yeah, on the scale of things that we're introducing in the budget, I think when it comes to our demand for alcohol, I don't think there's going to be a difference in people buying alcohol or not as a result of those changes. And I think Chancellor said it was a penny off a pint is what it translates to be. So it's not significant, but it's good. Well, it makes people happy, I guess. But in terms of young people, is that something worth noticing? Maybe not. The vape stuff is obviously interesting because lots of people are getting into it. And the issue is that people are getting into it that weren't cigarette smokers, tobacco smokers.
Exactly.
And so actually that's not what it was designed to do. It was designed to wean people off tobacco. And so there is something there about trying to tackle that. But there's also a balance that needs to be struck between kind of increasing prices to kind of price people out and encouraging demand for a black market where people are doing it anyway. And so a balance needs to be struck there, and more kind of research on what actually the harmfulness of vaping is, I think.
Yeah, agree. Coming to my last question, which is just kind of what is your message to people from your generation following the budget? What do you think that they should be taking real notice of? What do you think is actually going to impact their day-to-day lives? Is there any kind of action that you would encourage people to take off the back of it, or anything that you would say kind of don't sweat it, it's not going to be too bad?
Yeah, I think my main takeaway is that when it comes to things like the budget and these important fiscal events, there are Labour Party and just like the Conservative Party will be thinking, okay, how do we please our voters? How do we please the people that are key stakeholders in society that we will need to vote for us in the future? And those key stakeholders are hardly ever young people, because the traditional understanding of young people is that young people don't vote, they're not as engaged, and so therefore, even when you do things to help young people, the political reward isn't high, and the political cost of taking away from a different group and giving it to young people is quite high, because there'll be a reaction and you'll know about how people will be talking about it. And so what really frustrates me, and we need to become a key voting base. We need to become a key stakeholder in society, and people like the Chancellor and the Prime Minister and political parties from across the spectrum need to be known and aware that young people's voices do matter and will come back to bite them if they do not have us front and center of their mind when they are coming up with these key decisions. And that's why stuff like the tax allowance that we talked about, and the British ISA, actually, I think if people were talking to young people and young people were part of the conversation, these are things that would be included because they're important and they would be helpful to the change in way of work that young people are going into. And so my main takeaway is just get involved, be engaged, make sure that you are seen as important, because in order to get the benefits of that, people have to see you as important. And I really hope going forward we can form a real voting base of young people that are engaged, that do care, so that budgets like this are directly focused to our needs as well as others.
Yeah, such a good point. Great parting message. So I mean, there's so much more we could have talked about with the budget. Like it covered a lot of other things, but I think yeah, it's interesting to cover these main things that will affect younger people. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That was brilliant.